Dear learners, after research problem is clearly defined and a research design plan has been framed, the task of data collection begins. So in today's topic, we will discuss about the data and the collection of the data. Dear learners, the researcher should keep in view two types of data. One is primary data and second is secondary data. The primary data are those which are collected afresh for the first time for the present study at hand and thus happen to be original in nature. On the other hand, the secondary data are those which have already been collected by someone else and which have already been processed with the help of statistical process, or further they can be processed. The job of the researcher here is to decide what sort of data he would be using for the study, and accordingly he will have to select one or the other method of data collection. The method of collecting the primary and secondary data differ as primary data are to be collected originally, while in case of the secondary data, the nature of data collection work is purely that of compilation of the existing data. However, it is not necessary to choose only one of the two methods. The researcher may use a combination of both the methods. Following are described the different methods of data collection, which are pros and cons of each method. Firstly, in marketing research, we will take care of the collection of the secondary data. Secondary data means to the data which have already been collected and analyzed by somebody else and are ready to be analyzed. They refer to the data that are already available. When the researcher uses secondary data, then he has to consider a number of sources from where the researcher can obtain it. In this case, the researcher is certainly not confronted with the problems that are generally concerned with the collection of the original data. Secondary data may either be unpublished data or it may be the published data. Usually published data are available in form of A. Different publication of the central, state and the local governments. B. Different publications of the foreign governments or of international agencies, bodies and their subsidiary organizations. Third, technical and trade journals. Fourth, books, magazines and newspapers. Fifth, reports and publication of various associations connected with the business and industry, banks, stock exchange. Next is reports prepared by research scholars, universities, economists, etc. in different fields. Next, public records and statistics, historical documents, and the other sources of published information. The sources of unpublished data are many. There may be found in diaries, letters, unpublished biographies and autobiographies, and also may be available with scholars and research workers, trade associations, labor bureau, and other public/private individuals and organizations. Researcher must take all the care while using secondary data. The researcher must make a last-minute scrutiny because it is possible that the secondary data which he is going to use may actually be inappropriate or maybe inadequate in the context of the problem which the researcher wants to study. In this connection, a very popular scholar, Dr. A.L. Bolle, very aptly observed that it is never safe to take published statistics at their face value without knowing their meaning and the limitations, and it is always necessary to criticize arguments that can be based on them. So this is a very important point while taking care of the marketing research. Now there are several methods of data collection. How to choose the appropriate data collection? As such, the researcher must sensibly select the method for his own study, keeping in view some of the factors, like one is nature, scope and object of inquiry. That constitutes the most important factor that affects the choice of a specific method. The method selected should be such that it suits the type of inquiry that is to be undertaken by the researcher. This factor is also important in taking the decisions of whether the data already available are to be used or data not yet available are to be collected. Point number 2 in this regard is about availability of funds. Yes, it's very important. Availability of the fund for the research project also determines to a large extent the method to be used for the data collection. When funds at the disposal of the researcher are short, he will have to select a comparatively cheaper method which may not be as efficient and effective as some other costlier method. Finance, in fact, is a big constraint in practice, and the researcher has to act within this limitation. 3. Time factor. Availability of the time is also considered to be an important factor in deciding a particular method for data collection. Some methods may relatively more time, whereas with others the data can be collected in a comparatively shorter duration. The time that is at the disposal of the researcher does affect the selection of the method by which the data are to be collected. Fourth one is precision required. Precision required is yet another important factor that needs to be considered at the time of selecting the method of collection of data. Dear learners, we collect primary data during the course of doing experiments in an experimental research. But in case we do research of the descriptive type and perform survey, whether sample survey or census survey, then we can obtain primary data either through observation or through direct communication with respondents in one form or another, or through personal interviews. This, in other words, means that there are several methods of collecting primary data, particularly in surveys and descriptive researches. Important ones are observation method, interview method, through questionnaires, through schedules, and other methods which include like warranty cards, distributor audits, pantry audits, consumer panels, using mechanical devices, through projective techniques, in-depth interviews, and content analysis. We briefly take up each method separately. Observation method. The observation method is one of the most widely used methods, especially in studies relating to behavioral sciences. Observation becomes a scientific tool and the method of data collection for the researcher. It serves a formulated research purpose. It systematically planned and recorded and is subjected to checks and controls on validity and its reliability. Dear learners, under the observation method, the information is sought by way of investigators on direct observation without asking from the respondent. The main advantage of this kind of method is that subjective bias is eliminated if observation is done accurately. Secondly, the information obtained under this kind of method relates to what is currently happening. It is not complicated by either the past behavior or future intentions or attitudes. Thirdly, this method is independent of respondents' keenness to respond and as such is relatively less demanding of active cooperation on the part of respondents as happens to be the case in the interview or the questionnaire method. However, observation method has various limitations also. Firstly, it is an very expensive method. Secondly, the information provided by this method is very limited. Thirdly, sometimes unforeseen factors may interfere with the observational task. In case the observation is characterized by a vigilant definition of the units to be observed, the way of recording and observed information, standardized conditions of observations, and the selection of relevant data for observation, then the observation is called as structured observation. But when observation is to take place without such characteristics to be thought of in advance, the same is termed as unstructured observation. If the observer observes by making himself a member of the group, he is observing so that he can experience what the members of the group experience. The observation is called as the participant observation. But when the observer observes as a detached agent without any attempt on his part to experience what others feels, the observation of this type is often termed as non-participant observation. Interview method. The interview method of collecting data involves presentation of oral verbal stimuli and reply in terms of oral verbal response. This method is generally used through personal interviews and if feasible through telephone interviews also. Personal interviews method requires a person who is known as interviewer asking questions generally in a face-to-face contact to the other person or persons. Let me ask you this question. This kind of interview may be in form of direct or indirect investigation. In the case of direct personal investigation, the interviewers collect the information personally from the source concerned. Maybe like I ask you about your choices. He has to meet people from whom data have to be collected. This method is suitable for intensive investigation, but in some cases it may not be feasible to contact directly the person concerned. The direct personal investigation techniques may not be used. In such cases, an indirect oral examination is generally conducted under which the interviewer cross-examines other persons who are supposed to have knowledge about the problem under investigation and the information obtained is recorded. The method of collecting information through personal interview is usually carried out in a structured way and thus called structured interviews. Here it is predetermined that what to ask. Such interview involve the use of a set of predefined questions and of highly standardized techniques of recording. Thus, the interviewer in a structured interview follows a rigid procedure, asking question in a form and the order prescribed. Reverse is the case of the unstructured interviews, which are characterized by a flexibility of approach to questioning. Apart from this mentioned interviews, there are focused interviews, clinical interview, and non-directive interview. Focused interviews are meant to focus on the given experiences of the respondent and its effect. In this type of interview, the interviewer has got the freedom to decide the manner and series in which the questions are to be asked and has also the freedom to explore reasons and motives thereto. In case of focused interview, the main task of the interviewer is to restrict the respondents to a discussion of issues with which he seeks conversance. Such interviews are used usually in the formulation of hypotheses and also constitute a major type of unstructured interviews. The clinical interviews are related to broad motivations or with the course of individual's life experiences. Yeah, you can say example like a doctor generally does. The method of collecting information through clinical interviews is generally left at interviewer's prudence. In case of non-directive interview, the interviewer's role is simply to encourage respondents to talk about the given topic with a least direct questioning. In this case, the interviewers act as a vehicle to a comprehensive expression of the respondents' views and opinion and of the frame of reference within which such views and opinion take on personal significance. Dear learners, the collection of data through questionnaire. The questionnaire is a document that consists of a number of questions in printed or typed form or set of forms in a specific order. The questionnaire is then sent to the respondents who are then expected to carefully read and understand the questions and write down the replies in the spaces provided for the purpose within the questionnaire itself. The respondents have to answer the questions on their own without taking assistance from anybody else. The method of data collection by sending the questionnaire by mails to respondents is most extensively employed in various economic and business surveys. It is advisable that before using this method, researcher must conduct a pilot study or pilot survey so as to test the questionnaire. It's a large-scale study. Pilot study acquire a very significant role. Pilot study is actually a replica of the actual survey or a rehearsal of the main survey if rightly said. Pilot study help the researcher in highlighting the weakness of the questionnaire and also of the survey techniques so that the weaknesses found can be overcome and necessary corrections may be undertaken. Questionnaires are usually considered as the heart of any survey, hence utmost prudence needs to be dedicated while constructing it. However, if the researcher is unable to give proper attention to the questionnaire, it will not be set up properly, leading to confirmed failure of the survey. Having such relevance in the study, it becomes necessary to study the main aspects of a questionnaire, namely the journal form, question sequence, and question formulation and wording. Researchers should note the following with regard to these three main aspects of a questionnaire. Prerequisites of a good questionnaire. To obtain the fruitful result, questionnaire should be comparatively short and simple. In other words, the size of the questionnaire should be kept as minimum as possible. Question should be placed in a logical sequence, moving from easy to difficult questions. Personal and intimate question should preferably be asked at the end of the questionnaire. Technical jargons and vague terminologies that may lead to multiple interpretations should never be asked in a questionnaire. Questions of the questionnaire may be dichotomous, or which is the question with two options as answers only, yes or no. These questions may be multiple choice questions, the questions with more than two options as answers, alternative answer listed, or open-ended questions with no options at all, and letting the respondent answer the question with his own wisdom only. The last type of question, open-ended question, is often tricky to analyze and generally being avoided and should be avoided in a questionnaire to the extent possible. The questionnaire should contain some control question in the questionnaire which help the researcher indicate the reliability of the respondent. For instance, a question designed to determine the consumption of a particular material may be asked in the beginning in terms of the financial expenditure, and question may be asked in terms of weight in later part of the study. The control questions are put to do a cross check to see whether the information collected from the respondents is correct or not. Questions affecting the sentiments of the respondent should be avoided. The researcher should always provide adequate space for answering and questions in the questionnaire so as to enable the researcher reading, understanding, and editing. The researcher should also provide for indications of uncertainty, for example, do not know, cannot say, no preference, and so on. The researcher must take care that a brief set of directions with regard to filling up the questionnaire should invariably be given in starting of the questionnaire itself. Finally, the physical appearance of the questionnaire also affects the cooperation from the respondent that the researcher receives, and as such an attractive looking questionnaire, especially in case of mail survey, is always a plus point for the researcher. The quality of the paper along with the use of color, font type, font size, etc. must be good so that it may attract the attention of respondent If the questionnaire is not attractive enough, the respondent may not even fill it or fill it half-heartedly. Dear learners, let's have a look on the collection of data through schedules. This method of collection of data is very similar to that of collection of data through a questionnaire, which is little difference. The difference lies in the fact that schedule, it's a document containing the set of questions, are being filled in by the investigator himself, who is specially appointed for this purpose. These investigator, along with the schedules, meet the respondent at his place or their agreed place. There the investigator put to them the questions from the document in order, the questions that are listed there, and record the replies in the space meant for the same in the document by himself only. In certain cases, schedules are handed over to respondents, and the investigator then help them in recording their answers to various questions put in the said schedules. The appointed investigator explains the aims and objectives of the study undertaken, and also to remove the difficulties which any respondent may feel in understanding what actually has been intended to be asked in a particular question, or the definition or concept of difficult terms. Dear learners, let's have a look on what is the difference between a questionnaire and a schedule. Questionnaire and schedules both are particularly or popularly used methods of data collection in research surveys. There is much resemblance in the basic nature of these two methods, and this fact has made many people to remark that from a practical point of view, the two methods can be taken to be the same. But from the technical point of view or theoretical point of view, there does lie difference between the two. The important points of difference are as under. 1. Questionnaire is generally sent through mail. To collect data through questionnaires is comparatively cheaper and economically, since the money spent is on only preparing the questionnaire and then mailing them to the respondents. In case of questionnaire, chances of non-response is usually high, as many people may not respond and many return the questionnaire without answering all the questions. In case of a questionnaire, the researcher can never come to know that who is actually filling that questionnaire. For example, problem of authentication is there, but in case of schedule, the identity of respondent is always known. The questionnaire method is comparatively very slow, as many respondents do not even return the questionnaire in time despite several reminders. However, in case of schedules, the case is not the same. The information is collected well in time as they are filled in by the investigators themselves. In case of the questionnaire method, personal contact is generally not possible, as the questionnaires are sent to respondent by post, who also in turn return the same by post. However, in case of schedules, direct personal contact is established with the respondents. Questionnaire method can only be used when respondents are literate and cooperative. But in case of schedules, the information can be gathered even when the respondents happen to be illiterate. Under the questionnaire method, a wider and more representative distribution of sample is possible. But in respect of schedules, there usually remains the difficulty in sending investigators over a relatively wider area. The success of questionnaire method lies more on the quality of the questionnaire itself. But in the case of schedules, much depends upon the honesty and competence of the investigator. In order to attract the attention of respondents, the physical appearance of questionnaire must be quite attractive. But this may not be so in case of schedules, and they are to be filled by investigators only and not by the respondents. Dear learners, Let's sum up this topic. We have studied the various types of the data collection, like survey methods, like observation, interview, questionnaire. It is up to the nature of the problem which decide about what type of method is used. If I have to quote about the tourism industry, then observation method is also a very good method. Because this tourism and hospitality industry is a very multifarious industry, it is linked to many other fields. When tourism is taken as a business study, then normal questionnaire schedules are taken. When we are taking about anthropological or sociological studies, then sometimes the observation method plays an important role. When it is taken about the public administration study, then the interview method or focused interview methods, they are of utmost importance. So even in one study, while doing any marketing research, we can use multi type of the data collection techniques. Maybe some data can be collected by the researcher as interviews, some can be used as a questionnaire, and some can be other type of the different techniques. So, dear learners, I hope that you have understood about this different type of the data collection and why these data collections techniques, the understanding of these techniques is important in studying the marketing research. Thank you very much.